first off, we talk about sleep. In physique sports or in sports in general, the majority of what people focus on is training and nutrition. And those things are very important. Like, you don't train hard, you're not going to make gains. Andreas over here will definitely tell you that if you don't eat right, you're definitely not going to make gains as well. So I think that's really, really important to sort of understand. In fact, that's critical to understand. In fact, we've definitely had times where, like, we've trained people real hard and their nutrition wasn't on point and they didn't make any gains. But the big thing that people don't pay attention to often is sleep. Okay? The more and more in my career that I move forward, the more I realize just how essential sleep is. And that is really what this week is about. Now, if you look overall in the literature, the first thing you understand is the first place you start in studies is like association studies, like epidemiological studies, where they look, is there relationships between sleep and obesity and things of that nature? And one thing we do definitely know is that there's an inverse relationship between sleep and obesity and things like diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So basically, we see in general, if you look overall in our society, that the less sleep people are getting, there's a tendency to be higher propensity of obesity and a higher propensity to have things like type 2 diabetes, okay? So that's what we see. That's what we see. But then experimentally, what's the case? So here's basically what we actually see overall. They've done research basically where they take individuals, and just for 1 week's time, this is one of the studies that we presented actually yesterday. They took individuals and they compared them 8 hours of sleep versus 5.5 hours of sleep a night. Okay, which, you know, most of us in this institute would consider like a really good night's sleep, yep. 5.5 hours of sleep. But the thing to understand is that they compared 5.5 hours of sleep. They knocked them down from 8 to 5.5 hours. Now that's not like it's 5 days. That's not a lot of sleep deprivation, right? That's like 2.5 hours less sleep a night. Now guess what happened? These individuals actually ended up gaining 2 pounds that week, okay? And they became like very like insulin resistant. So basically their blood glucose rose up, they were secreting more insulin, and they gained 2 pounds, okay? So they actually gained like 2 pounds of fat in 1 week's time just from 2.5 hours of sleep deprivation. It's like, man, that's horrible, right? Okay, so that now the key is, well, what's going on? That's just normal, okay? The next thing to understand is what if you were dieting? When we diet down, most of the time we think about, oh, I just got to restrict my calories, I got to have my cardio. No one thinks, oh, I really have to focus on sleep. That's going to get me shredded. Well, they did a study where they took individuals, they calorie restricted them, okay? Put them on a calorie deficit. Now, they had either, again, 5.5 hours of sleep or 8 hours of sleep a night. The people who had 8 hours of sleep a night lost double the body fat. Double the body fat from 8 hours of sleep a night versus 5.5. And what's really interesting about this study is that those people who had less sleep lost double the muscle. So sleep itself spares muscle mass and you lose more fat. Now think about that for a second. Like when we're dying, like, oh my God, I got to up my cardio, or oh my God, I restrict my calories more. What about the easiest thing you could do? I mean, I'm not saying it's super easy for a lot of people, but just go to bed earlier. If you go to bed earlier, you literally, according to this study, might lose up to double the fat. And all your hard gains, all your hard-earned gains in the weight room on gaining muscle, on changing your physique, you can sustain that muscle mass, which is going to be very important for what? Sustaining your metabolic rate. So I think that's really, really cool and really applicable. But again, the lesson is that when you're dieting down, 8 hours of sleep versus 5.5, people lost double the fat mass and spared more muscle tissue. It's huge. So then the next thing is like, all right, what's going on? Like, why are people gaining fat when they have less sleep? And that's a really good question. And there's a lot of different things. Well, one thing is you definitely become more insulin resistant, right? So we actually see that, like, for every time you eat a meal, like carbs, for example, you release a lot more insulin because you're you're insulin resistant in the muscle tissue itself. So I think that's really important. That might be causing fat gain. Like constantly secreting a lot more insulin might lead to more fat gain. Second thing is that your appetite goes up. So basically studies show that if you lack sleep, your appetite goes up, meaning that you'll eat more food that day, you'll snack more. But the question is, where are you snacking more, right? Where are you snacking more? And I think that's something to kind of to think about, okay? So they did a study, and we're going to put this infographic out on the snacking, and they look, well, where do you snack more? And they looked, was it breakfast? No, it wasn't breakfast. Was it lunch? No. Did you eat more at dinner? No. Did you snack more throughout the day? No. What ended up happening is that after dinner snacking went up more. So what ends up happening is that when you have calorie restriction, it shifts your desire to eat to the inactive period. So you want to eat more when you want to snack more at night, okay? And that's a no-no because it's the inactive period. So that's very, very important to understand. So that kind of moves us to the fact that if tonight I'm sleep deprived, okay? Let's say for example, Andy calls me at night. I'm getting ready to go to bed. It's 10 night. He calls me like, Doc, there's an emergency. Tomorrow we basically have this massive experiment. Things went wrong. We need to make sure that we go over our protocol. And I end up having to stay up 3 extra hours. Now I'm sleep deprived. And then I have to get up super early. So now I'm running on 4 hours of sleep. Okay? What that will mean is that the next day, I will tend to eat and snack more at night after dinner. So the way to correct both issues, sleep deprivation and snacking, is literally when I get home, I eat my dinner, I don't do anything else, I go to bed. And the main thing is that will counter not only the negative effects of sleep, but it'll counter the snacking. Because inevitably studies are showing I'm going to snack more. So that's one thing, that's one way to counter that. Next thing we're going to really talk about is what kind of, and also the other thing is that activity lowers. So basically like they'll track people, you guys know, if you pull out your phone right now and you can look, there's usually like a heart app on there, or you may have a step app. So if you go and look at your heart app, it'll tell you how many steps you have during a day, which is kind of what we call spontaneous activity. Studies show that when you have calorie restriction, your spontaneous activity, which is like walking around, fidgeting, scratching your head, that goes down, and sedentary behavior, meaning sitting on your behind or lying down, goes up. So activity goes down and sedentary behavior goes up. So that might also drive why you're gaining fat when you lack sleep. Now, what drives that? One of the things, actually, before I get into that, another thing that can mess you up entirely that I want to discuss is basically your sleeping patterns, okay? Sleeping patterns are very, very important. So if I go to bed at 8 tonight, and then 11 the next night, and then 9 the next night, and then, then say I don't get any sleep at all, and then I crash right when I get home at 7 at night. If every day I'm sleeping different, that actually also leads to fat gain and insulin resistance. So it turns, because it messes up everything, like your circadian rhythms for when you should eat, how you should eat, when you should be active, become misaligned. And so basically what it tells us is that you should have a generalized sleep pattern within a normal bandwidth. So for example, every night you should probably go to bed if you go to bed between 9 and 10:30, keep that. Don't go, I'm going to go sleep at 1 in the morning, tonight, and tomorrow I'm just going to make up for it by sleeping at 9, right? These misalignments of sleep, they've done research and they've shown it makes you insulin resistant, and that's going to make you gain fat. So try and have a generalized sleeping pattern if you want an optimal physique, and you want to be lean, and you want to be sensitive to carbohydrates, okay? So Ryan Lowry says, should I put my orange glasses on now? Yes. We'll talk about that later too. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is basically talking about what causes you to stay awake, right? Well, thing to understand is that our circadian rhythms, like our natural biorhythms on how we respond, whether we're awake, whether we're sleepy, are oftentimes dictated by light. And that's why I answered Ryan's question, because it leads into this question, okay? So people laugh at me, but like if you follow me on Snapchat and you follow me on like my Instagram story, you'll see sometimes at night I'm wearing these funny orange glasses, and they look like I'm a gamer, like I'm playing video games before bed, okay? Which could be true, but the bottom line is I put those glasses on. I put those glasses on because they block out blue light, okay? At night, light actually decreases things like melatonin, and that keeps us awake. Now, there are studies, lots of studies, where there's a large association between nighttime TV watching and body fatness. Meaning that the more TV you're watching at night, the more fat you are. Now, they used to think that's because, well, people are sitting on their behinds and they're sedentary. But in reality, what they found out mechanistically in studies is that they took mice and exposed them to light during the time they would normally sleep, and they gained fat and became insulin resistant. Turned out that those mice ended up shifting their feeding behavior to where they started eating during the inactive periods. Okay? So when they were normally inactive, that's when they had cravings. When they basically fasted them during that time and forced them to eat during the active periods, they didn't gain fat. So the light period, basically like having a lot of light at night, like staring at your computer at night, doing homework at night, doing work at night, watching television, playing video games at night, will actually shift your feeding behavior to the night period. And you know how it is. When you're watching TV at night, think about it. Like that's when the ice cream comes out. That's when the treats come out. I know personally that's like when I like to make like all the treats I put on Instagram. Like Paul's eating some right now. But that's when it happens. That's when you get those cravings. All you got to do is basically like you can get these orange glasses which block blue light, and that will eliminate those cravings at night. And now you'll want to tend to eat more during the active period. Okay. So last infographic I think comes out either today or tomorrow. Is protein before bed anabolic? Well, I think we know, intuitively that protein's anabolic. I mean, like when I started lifting in high school, I started like drinking protein before bed because I knew it would make me grow. So I think it's similar, but they actually have done research on this now. Basically, consuming protein before you go to bed, actually people in the study that we're going to show out is out of Van Loon's lab, actually gained more muscle mass when they had protein before bed than those that didn't, even when protein was controlled for. So the point is, yeah, having a good source of protein before bed can be anabolic and beneficial. And realize that we'll actually do a whole thing on this, a whole week on what nighttime feeding, what should that look like. But that's the concept. So let me go ahead and overview this whole topic. Number one, lack of sleep. You should pay attention to your sleep just like you pay attention to your training and nutrition. Even if you're only sleeping 2 hours less a night than you should, that could impact your fat loss right now, where you get your fat loss cut in half and you could lose more muscle. Even if you're not dieting and you're going throughout a week where you're going to essentially have a lot of problems with sleep that week, realize you can gain fat that week. You'll be more insulin resistant and you'll tend to snack more at night. Now, listen, here's the thing that I want you to understand, okay? If, for example, you have no choice, there are times, like, for example, take Andreas here. Basically, he is doing the nutrition for our combine athletes. Now, we have almost like 30 combine athletes right now. Now, anyone who's ever worked nutrition knows that if that's the case, you are not sleeping. Like you're not sleeping much that time. So he's working 24/7 to get these athletes ready for the biggest event of their life. Some of the best athletes in the world are here. He's going to lack sleep. So if he is lacking sleep, can he counter that? Well, possibly what he can do is things like realizing like, hey, when I do go home, I'm going to have a tendency to want to snack more. I'm just going to have to get to bed. It could be things like he might be more insulin resistant during that time. Maybe he can take supplements that improve insulin sensitivity, right? Like berberine. Or maybe during this time period, he tapers his carbs down and goes on a lower carbohydrate diet because can't handle as many carbs during that time period, right? So there are things where like or you're a shift worker and you have no choice. Those are things that you can counter. At least you can attempt to stop the bleeding. So next thing I realize is that make sure you have a normal sleeping pattern. So don't have a crazy where I'm going to bed 1 in the morning one time, or I'm going to sleep at 9 the next night. Have a normal pattern, at least within an hour to an hour and a half bandwidth. Finally, the thing to understand is that at night, try and limit light exposure. If you can't, then wear the orange glasses to block the blue light. And then finally, if you're looking to make gains, having a good solid protein source before bed can make you get gains. So I think that's the lesson for the week. What we'll do now is we'll take your questions.
Really quick, it's going off on Instagram, a lot of conversation with regards to what type of protein before bed.
Okay, what type of protein before bed is like a very controversial question. What I'm going to basically tell you is this. A high quality either meat or dairy or egg-based protein, okay? Because no one's put them to head. But the thing is, during the day, for example, whey protein's better than most things, but again, stick with either meat, egg, or dairy-based protein before bed, and you're gonna make gains. So as long as it's high quality, that's good.
Matthew asks, how long after a weight session can you do cardio without having a detrimental effect on gains?
If you trained your legs, you would get detrimental effects immediately if you're doing cardio.
What about
so
HIIT?
How long? Except HIIT. So if you do traditional cardio, just realize that in a dose-dependent fashion, you're going to interfere with gains. So what our lab actually, though, did find is that if you do interval, like HIIT sprinting, 10 to 30-second sprints, you actually may gain some muscle mass. Okay? So as long as you keep the cardio brief and intense, that's fine. Or if you drink your post-workout shake and then you just go for a walk, that's probably not going to be bad.
I got a good one. Splitting up sleep, so in regard to napping.
Yeah, good question. That's a thing that I think you can, again, the key thing is having a stable sleep pattern. So if you can't get like 8 hours of sleep a night, and you're getting 6 hours a night, but you're also taking an hour nap a day, I do think that is a beneficial thing to do. In fact, one of the things I want to do at the ASPE is eventually like expand the ASPE, maybe having a place where guys can do that, especially because like today was an early day, everyone had to come in early. So I do think naps are very beneficial.
We can call it the SBS lab.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're gonna actually Sam, our COO, was talking about setting up a sleep lab at some point.
That would be awesome.
That would be great. Yeah, because
because it leads to gains, says research.
Yes. Let's see. Do you guys want to answer me? You call their names out too. Okay, someone goes, David Hernandez goes, I worked 110 hours a week for about 6 years. Very sleepy. That sounds like grad school to me. Okay. Let's see.
Another one. How can women deal with sleep problems during hormonal
Wait, he had a
change?
follow-up to that. He said, am I screwed?
Oh.
So...
You're never screwed if you can make changes. You can always make changes, and I think it's like there's like an attitude, like for example, where say I had a bad meal during the day, and you're like, well, screw it. The rest of the day, I'm just going to do whatever because the day's gone. No, you can like start turning things around now. So I say just because you've had 6 years, look, that was the story of grad school and the first several years out of grad school. When I started like a lab out of grad school, I didn't sleep. I was getting at 4 in the morning. That doesn't mean that like I can't correct that now. So now at night I'm like, really, like I got home really late. I really want to watch this movie, but I have to take care of my sleep.
Any disadvantages in lifting after 5 to 6 hours of sleep?
Okay, the thing to understand is after 4 to 6 hours of sleep, you're really insulin resistant. Okay, so you want to do something that's going to help counter that, and something that's not going to be super. So there is a problem if you're going to go do your heavy day that day. What you're going to do is more of a light metabolic recovery workout. That'll improve insulin sensitivity. But if you compound the lack of sleep with a very brutal training session, that could have a negative effect.
What about exogenous ketones before bed? Kind of like a brain fuel.
That's a really good question. Let me say this. We don't have studies on exogenous ketones before bed, but I can say this. Part of the sleep process is restoration of glycogen stores or your carb stores in neurons in the brain, okay? Ketones can be the other fuel that can be used in the brain. So technically, if you have ketones and they're being used for functions that glucose would have been used for, that glucose can now go to restoring brain glycogen stores. So technically, that would enhance the sleep benefits of sleep. So theoretically, I think it'd be beneficial.
I have another one. What happens if you work out while you are sick? Or do you think it's advantageous, or should you just almost take an off week?
So with working out and sleeping, there's basically you have what's called like an inverted U, and I remember looking at this in grad school. So immune function goes from here to up, from low intensity to semi-moderate intensity exercise, and then it goes down. So for example, wind gates are really brutal. If I go in there and do wind gates, it might down my immune function. But on the other hand, if I go outside and do a brisk walk, technically that's exercise, but it actually can improve my immune function. So what you want to do when you're sick is select more light to borderline moderate activity, because that could help with blood flow and help your immune function. But once you go past that, it will impair recovery. So just take that into consideration.
Any disadvantages? Wait, can you periodize strength training to body weight training?
So basically, if I'm listening right, I'm assuming body weight training is going to be lighter, higher rep activity. Whereas like resistance training will tend to be heavier activity. So the main thing is, the answer is yes, because if you look at last week's episode, we talked about muscle fibers, and one thing we talked about, very high rep training to target the slow twitch muscle fibers. So you have a weight training day, one day could be a moderate weight training day, and one day your light day could be body weight training day. So that's a form of periodization, so the answer is yes.
Is and how beneficial is ZMA supplementation before bed?
ZMA supplementation before bed. And there's the thing about, here's the thing, like especially when you talk about like that type of supplementation, is oftentimes when people ZMA, especially like magnesium, oftentimes when people can't fall asleep, oftentimes that's like deficiency of magnesium. And in fact, like Andreas has used that successfully with some of our athletes who haven't slept well. So taking a ZMA supplement prior to bed will help with the onset of sleep.
EAs before bed.
Essential amino acids before bed. I think it goes back to the thing I was talking about, like having protein before bed or amino acids can certainly be beneficial.
I got another good one. Essentially, waking up in the middle of the night to consume calories, is that beneficial? And if so, would I count it for the previous day's calories or the next day's?
Who is that? Who is that?
This is good times.
Good times? Okay. Here's the thing, good times. And lastly, I'm going to answer you next. But basically, you want to understand this. There is a benefit to the fasting period. So when you fast, there's a process called autophagy, where basically what that basically means, your cell's cleaning itself out. Okay, so basically damaged proteins are getting like recycled. And you want that. You want to keep a cell healthy, right? You need time to clean the cell out. When you're anabolic, that process gets stopped. So technically having a fasted period in the middle of the night can allow your cells to regenerate, can allow that autophagy phase where you're cleaning the cell out. And so if you constantly have meal frequency so high that even during sleep, you're not allowing that to occur, eventually I think you become insulin resistant. And so I think that I'd sleep through the night. Now, strategically speaking, if you're coming close to an event, like a powerlifting contest, and you have a few weeks and you need to optimize recovery, you might do stuff like that only when you wake up. Don't, because it could also interfere with your sleep, and that's bad. But my main point is that, like, you don't want to do that all the time. Maybe for a burst, but not all the time.
Were you having another one, Doc? Did you?
Yeah, I was going to say, lastly, ask, if you sleep 5 to 6 hours and become insulin resistant, is it a good way to counter that problem by not eating carbs until post-workout? Like I said, I think, if you know you're going to be insulin resistant, I think lowering your carbs during that time is beneficial. Anything that's going to improve insulin sensitivity is going to be beneficial, and that certainly is a way.
Can training late at night affect my sleep pattern?
That's a really good question. So anything depends. Do you train late at night every night? Because if you do, it's not going to disrupt your normal sleep pattern. And if you're able to still get like 8 hours of sleep, it's not going to affect your normal sleep pattern. If you normally train, like circadian rhythms adapt to the time you train. It's the way it is. As far as performance, how you sleep, everything's impacted by a scheduled pattern. So if I normally get up in the morning and I train, and then all of a sudden I train at 9, 10 at night, I will get an adrenaline response. I will change things up, and that could potentially impact my sleep that night, possibly negatively. However, if that's my normal pattern, as long as I'm getting the sleep that I recommended in this talk, then no.
How do you feel about carbs at night?
It's interesting about carbs at night. They've done a lot of studies. I think, again, you have to always diagnose an individual and go like, that individual A is different from individual B. Everyone's different. They've taken studies with there's a study I recently read. Actually, Ryan always points this one out to me. They took individuals who were a little bit overweight, and they were police officers. And basically, they either had them eat most of their carbs at the beginning of the day, or they shifted their carbs to the end of the day, and they lost more fat when they shifted them to the end of the day. There's also a lot of research at a Molly Bray's lab, where basically they either had they had their carbs at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, and they controlled for total calorie intake. And when they shifted it toward the end of the day, their total fat metabolism throughout the whole day was greater, and they were leaner and had a little bit more muscle mass. So based on that study, I think it could be beneficial. You could call their names out too.
Is it true that high glycemic carbs at night help you get good sleep? Peter Choi.
High glycemic carbs? High glycemic carbs could make you fall asleep faster, but we do know from research that they actually make you more insulin resistant the next day. So it's kind of a trade, right? So it's like you have to take that in consideration. It's like, look, if you can't sleep and you know you have to get up for something very important the next day, could that be a tool? Sure. If you're doing that every night, it's probably not a good thing. So remember, it's like, think about tools in the toolbox. Like, say tomorrow, like, I have to be on camera for a movie or something like that, and I don't want to look completely exhausted. Maybe I'm going to have some carbs that I know that'll put me asleep that night. But just take into consideration that when you do that the next day, you will tend to be more insulin resistant the next day. It seems to program your metabolism to be more of a carb burner the next day and less of a fat burner.
We'll take about 3 more questions, really quick. Anna Lynn?
Okay. Anna Lynn,
do you want to ask? Go ahead.
yeah, says, I think it's Ann.
Ann, oh yeah, okay. So,
Ann says, what about heavy workouts under exam period? I haven't slept more than 8 hours the last 2 days, but had the best workout ever today. New PR.
I asked this because a lot of us go through this. Me and Will both have gone through this also.
Good question. Well, Ann, 8 hours of sleep, one, is not bad. We do see in studies that with basketball players and motor performance that getting 10 hours, 12 hours sometimes, or at least 10 hours can actually be more beneficial in certain situations than 8. But you got to realize it's not really realistic for most people. So getting more sleep could be more beneficial. I think it was a question someone asked. So I think you're fine, Ann. What I will go back in my sports psychology days, one of my professors, his name was Dr. Simons. He's one of the pioneers of sports psychology, one of the first sports psychologists actually to make a career out in the field. Because before sports psychologists were just scientists. So, true pioneer, and basically what he said is most people when they periodize their training just look at periodization. This month's going to be a hypertrophy month, next month's going to be a heavy month, the third month's going to be a power month, or they'll go week 1's going to be hypertrophy, week 2 heavy. They don't actually stop and think, when is my most difficult times of the year or semester going to be? So what I used to do is I was able to make gains when I was doing grad school and train really hard. And what I ended up doing was I looked at the syllabus at the beginning of the semester and said, here's going to be my final week. Here's going to be here's where all my exams are, and here's where there's going to be a low week. And I actually planned my training so that on the light testing weeks, my training would be hardest. And on the finals week, I'd be tapering. That's advanced stuff. So you want to periodize your training around those schedules, because even if you didn't sleep well, you seem to be very good at coping cognitively, but if someone's really stressed about the exam, that could negatively impact their training. So that's just my thought.
Yeah. I got one.
Do tryptophan supplements help?
Tryptophan supplements, actually, Andreas.
Albumin.
Yeah.
Pretty high in tryptophan.
Yeah.
There's some studies that
Yeah.
can improve sleep a little bit.
Yeah, alpha-lactalbumin is high in tryptophan, and actually Andreas gave me some last night. That's found high yield in certain whey protein products. So basically, there's a fraction of milk protein that's high in tryptophan, and so that actually can be beneficial before sleep. So yeah.
Amy Jefferson asks, if you can't get through a training session due to hunger, how hard should you push through? If you're struggling hard, should you listen to your body and stop or continue?
So if you can't get through a training session
Because you're hungry.
I think the thing is, well, are they dieting and stuff like that? I think the thing to understand is
Supposed to be a bikini competitor or something.
oh, you're a competing competitor. Okay, listen, the thing I think, Amy, to understand is that programming nutrients around the training session, if your goal during that training session is more performance and muscle, just try and time some of your nutrients around that training session so that you can perform better. Now, Amy, if you're really worried about carbs stopping fat metabolism or something like that, and you're close to a contest, maybe try some MCTs or coconut butter or coconut oil. That'll give your brain, or even exogenous ketones, that'll give your brain energy, but you'll still maintain fat metabolism.
She said yes during competition prep.
Yeah, so that's what I would recommend, is try more a lower carb approach if you're concerned about that, and try something like I said, coconut butter, coconut oil, MCTs, or even ketones, because that you won't interfere with those fat adaptation processes.
I love you.